And we say hello to Phil Keisling, former Oregon Secretary of State from 1991 to 1999. He is currently director of the Center for Public Service at Portland State University and is the leading advocate for voting by mail. Phil Keisling, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Always nice to speak with you. So your state of Oregon has been reliably Democratic in national elections for some time now. Does voting by mail, which you have pioneered, as I mentioned, does that make your state bluer or redder than the old way?
I think that's impossible to say, and I'll note that while our statewide offices until this election were all held by Democrats, a Republican won our race for Secretary of State, our number 2 position this time, Dennis Richardson, almost won the state treasurer's race. And I think the legislature stayed Democratic, but there was one seat that went to Republicans. You know, I've heard this argument ever since we started it. Is it going to help one party or another? The people that originally opposed it were Democrats back when I was in the legislature and Secretary of State in the early 90s. In fact, it was urged by the Democratic National Committee that it ought to be vetoed back when a Republican legislature passed it in 1995. Well, if they like it, it must be bad. And the Democratic governor did veto it. Then we had a chance to have a special election for U.S. Senate, and a Democrat won, Ron Wyden, and then the Republicans did a 180-degree turn on it and fought tooth and nail against it. So we finally had to go to the initiative campaign to get it passed in 1998, and we've done it since 2000. I think what it really does is it gets a lot more people voting. It helps democracy with a small d. It makes turnout higher in rural areas that are overwhelmingly for Trump. It makes turnout higher in urban areas that went overwhelmingly for Clinton. How it all works out in the mix, I don't know. But when you get more turnout, you're going to get a more diverse electorate. You're going to get a younger average age electorate. And there may be moments when that's going to tilt to one party or the other, but it could change. So I think what makes a state blue or red is a lot more than about how they vote, but I think our politics is healthier here because we have a lot more people participate.
Mm-hmm. Stronger democracy, small d, as you point out.
Exactly right.
What is the actual rate of voter participation? Let me try that again. Voter participation under your system compared to going to the polls on Election Day?
Well, it's a little hard to compare just within Oregon because we evolved the system. By the time we switched over, we already had 60% of the people voting absentee ballot anyway. But I think it's the most useful way to look at it is to go back to the 2014 midterm elections. It'll have a bigger impact in midterms than in presidentials, although it will in both. We had an average registered voter turnout of 71%. The national average was 48%. In the 10 states that were, or 15 states that were fierce battlegrounds, we still were 12 points on average above. We had no big races in 2014 to speak of. You know, and that's real numbers. I mean, magnified across a national level, we're talking tens of millions of additional votes. We know when we do it in local and lower turnout elections, primaries and local elections, it often doubles turnout. Now it goes 15% to 30% or 25 to 50%. But I'll give you just one indicator in our primary in May, and Trump already had wrapped up the nomination, and Clinton pretty much too, based on the mathematics. We still had 69% of registered Democrats vote and 63% of registered Republicans. I think it was the highest rates in the country. We even beat New Hampshire out of the gate. So it's just logic that when you let every voter have their ballot ahead of time, and then all they have to do is fill it out and get it returned, it just removes a big obstacle that they have now where they have to go to find their polling place on Election Day, come rain, come shine, or other things that can stand in the way.
Well, and of course that, rain or shine on shiny days, you get a better turnout, and the rainy days you don't, and, then you don't have that nice democracy that we're trying to
Well, you take weather out of the picture. There's going to be a big national election that people are going to sigh on and say it was weather. I mean, could you imagine the results of the 26th presidential election that also happened to coincide with terrible rain and thunder and blizzards even in the upper Midwest? I mean, it's not impossible. On November 8th, you have blizzards in Wisconsin and Michigan. Can you imagine how we'd be feeling even worse if we had the exact same numbers, but you said, damn, The weather gods were the ones that did it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we should take all these things out of the equation, and that's why yet another reason that I like the idea of what I call vote at home.
Do you think wider participation in elections would moderate the choice of candidates away from the extremists in each party?
Well, this is a great question. It's a reality of politics today that most elections for Congress and state legislature are now decided in the party primary. Win the dominant party primary, then the general election is just a formality. I think there is, personally, and I've seen it, in Oregon. I think there's a difference when 50% or 60% of party members weigh in on choosing a candidate versus 15%. I mean, in the 2014 cycle, the turnout of registered voters in party primaries was less than 20%. The median age was in many states was between 60 and 65 years old. And that's not to say that older voters are necessarily, less moderate. It varies. But I think when candidates know they just have to win among the most intense partisans of their respective primaries, where's their incentive to say, elect me because I'll work together with everybody to solve this and that problem? No, it becomes more of a blood sport. I won't even sit down and shake their hand, or talk to them because they're the evil empire. And I see a lot of that rhetoric out there. I've seen it for years. I think it's worse, and I think it is connected to plunging turnout. And but you don't have that in Oregon, I think, to the extent you do in other states.
We're speaking with former Oregon Secretary of State Phil Keisling, who's currently director of the Center for Public Service at Portland State University. Phil, does voting from home have a different effect on ballot questions or local offices where the general public may have low information?
Yeah, there's first of all, there's some data. Dr. Robert Stein out of Rice University has looked at Colorado that people just vote in more races, so you have less drop-off as you get down ballot when you have it in front of you at home. And I liken it to the fact that you can sit down and if a question comes up or you need more information, I'll just go on the internet. We started this in Oregon. I mean, the internet really didn't exist. But what we've found is we've talked to people in Oregon about why they like it. They love the fact that it's convenient. It saves millions of dollars, even after you pay for the postage to mail the ballots out, because you don't have the polling places. But the biggest single reason that Oregonians say they're enthusiastic about it is they feel they can cast a more informed ballot. Because they may pay attention to things at the top a little bit more, but as you get down the ballot, I don't know about, I can just sit down at my kitchen table and look it up on the internet or my voter's pamphlet, or maybe even call a friend who I know might have some expertise on it. So I think it really makes for a more informed electorate. And Oregonians, that's what one of the big things they tell us about why they like it. And, don't we want people to feel better about the votes they cast?